Welcome to the Grit Growth Podcast. Commit to conquer, lead your life, leave a legacy, gather your grit, and let's get after it.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Nick, welcome. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah. How's everybody doing?
Great. How are you?
Good, man. That looks like a fun room, Carson.
It's where all the magic happens.
all of it?
Well, save a full select few. But
I don't know. You got the rubber bands back there. It's
yeah. Oh, you can't even see what's in these two corners.
Ooh.
Oh boy. Well, yeah. That's for another podcast.
Yeah. That one, yeah. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just kick things off with a little introduction. Nick, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and about your real estate journey.
Absolutely. So Nick Banks. I'm currently a managing director and principal with Avison Young. I lead our North Florida team. I sold my company Front Street to Avison Young about 3.5 years ago, and we transitioned our whole team over to Avison Young. Avison Young is a privately owned but global real estate services company. So we do brokerage, property management, consulting, project management, valuation, really a full service commercial real estate firm. Most of our business is in the US. We're a Canadian based company. Most of our business is in the US, but we have offices in Europe, primarily the UK, all over Canada. So it's a pretty robust team of about 5,000 real estate professionals total. So I ran Front Street I started the company in 2002 when I still lived in South Florida. I'm a Gator, so I'd gone to school here and just always had a dream of moving back to Gainesville. So I did that in 2004 and really picked Gainesville as a place to live more than anything else. It was more of a lifestyle decision than a career-driven decision. So I was a remote work pioneer before it was a real thing. But so I've been here since 2004, and for the first 4 or 5 years, really all my business was still out of town, and I was working remotely primarily, but had my own firm and had the flexibility to do that. I was developing small projects at the time, and had a partner that I was doing that with. I also had a brokerage arm of my company, and we did mortgage brokerage as well as real estate brokerage. And in 2010, transitioned the company and started doing business in Gainesville. So it was really 2010 to 2019 until I transitioned the company to Avison Young that I grew Front Street here locally. So been a lot of phases along the way and a lot of adaptations, but I owned, my own company for 17 years, really, until selling to Avison Young.
I mean, I heard a couple of things there. The one, kind of moving to Gainesville for lifestyle. I mean, that took some courage, I'm assuming. I mean, that wasn't just what was behind that? There was something driving that, because you just, the lifestyle, then it's saying you didn't like where you're at. And how'd that come about?
It's interesting. So when I was in school at UF, by the time I was ready to graduate, I couldn't wait to get out of Gainesville. I just felt like the walls were closing in on me. It's a small town. I was ready to move back home, which was Broward County, Fort Lauderdale area in South Florida. And so I moved there, and I loved it. I just, I liked the whole lifestyle. I liked the place. I had friends. It was familiar to me. But what I realized once I had kids, and you guys, I know have kids and probably have experienced this to some degree, overnight, you see the world differently. And I just quickly realized that was not the place where I wanted to raise my family. And so that's really what prompted the move. Now, it took my 2 oldest kids that are now 22 and 20, they were 4 and 2 at the time. So it took a few years to kind of convince myself that it was a viable decision, that I wasn't going to send myself into financial ruin. But it was a family driven decision, and it's great. I mean, Gainesville is a great place to raise a family. it can be a challenging place to do business at times. And I think we can segue into that, later on in our discussion, but it's a great lifestyle. It's a great place to raise kids. And, I've never looked back. I love living here.
So it took some kind of perseverance those first few years. I mean, you're if I heard you right, you're kind of questioning that move. It was, can I make a living in Gainesville here, being remote? It's right for the lifestyle, but is it right for us financially? What was that? Was there some turning points in there? Were there points where you kind of look back and said, man, is this right? I mean, did you have to look in the mirror sometimes?
Yeah, it was a bold move. What's interesting, once
bold
I made
move,
that,
Cotton.
What's that?
The bold move, Cotton.
Once I made that move, it's funny. My brother and his wife, and they had one child at the time. They had another, since they've moved here. They moved up. My parents moved up. One of my best friends, who I grew up with in South Florida, he and his wife moved up here. I think it kind of opened the doors for possibility. That hey, if they figured it out, maybe this isn't such a tough hurdle to overcome. But yeah, look, I questioned it. I moved here without any business ties to Gainesville, really no personal ties either. Really just picked it as a place to live. And some of that, I've realized, was probably this nostalgia of having gone to school here. And, Gainesville has certainly changed a lot over the years, but there are some things, primarily, the area on campus and some of the area, remaining around it, that really reminded me of when I was in school. And I loved that whole nostalgia of, to some extent, being able to, revisit those very formative years of being a college student here.
So did you relive those years, the first couple that you were here?
No, I had thankfully already outgrown that. So I didn't get myself into trouble. But yeah, it's funny, like for the first couple of years, like when friends would visit, they'd want to come, relive their college years. And I'd sit them down and say, look, man, I'll drive you there. I'll come pick you up. I'm like, but I live here now. Like, I'm not going to go act like a college student anymore. Years are behind me. So yeah, luckily I behaved.
Some discipline had to kick in, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Reality. I really had an advantage too. And some of these things, I probably didn't appreciate at the time, but because I wasn't focused on doing business here and growing my business here, I was really occupied and, doing fine with what I was doing, and just continuing along in South Florida. I had this opportunity to kind of sit on the sidelines and be an observer. And I was just kind of a removed observer of what was going on. And so it was over those first, 5 years or so that I really started to formulate my plan to transition the company. That was one big driver. Another driver, quite frankly, was boredom. I'm not somebody that does well with boredom. And, you guys will remember, what our economy looked like in 08, 09, beginning of 2010. Wasn't a lot going on in real estate. And that helped me reframe my whole views, to this day, of how I see retirement. I always thought retirement would be, one day you decide you're done and you sit there and stare at the ocean or your pool or something, and that's it. And I realized I don't do well with idle time. I need things to do. And I had this, we all did, an uninvited kind of vacation where there just wasn't a lot to work on and do, during that time frame. That's really when I formulated the plan to really introduce Front Street here locally. So what I had learned along the way was, this is a small market in relative terms to other places where I'd done business. And, I'd held some statewide positions and other things that I'd done before I started my own firm. I worked for a big developer. I worked for GE Capital, which at the time was one of the biggest companies in the world, GE was. And so I had this perspective that I felt was different. And what I noticed was, the market here from a commercial real estate brokerage standpoint was dominated by one company that was a hybrid firm that was primarily a residential firm with a commercial division. And even more amazing, the market was dominated by one person that was at that firm. And I just thought, as an outsider, people that lived here just said, well, that's just the way it is. That's who does all the business. That's who everybody goes to. As an outsider, who was, somewhat bold and had some grit, to use your podcast title, I found that to be an interesting challenge, you know, and it got me interested in wanting to figure out how to do business here. And so I decided to create a commercial only firm. And at the time, there wasn't one in this market. We were the only one. And really just do things differently than what the status quo was doing, you know, in regards to commercial real estate brokerage. One example of that is because these firms that were doing commercial work were hybrid firms that were doing residential and commercial, they had to belong to the board of realtors, which meant they had to put their listings in MLS. My whole career in commercial real estate, you know, you don't have that in other markets. You know, MLS is a residential tool. And so I made this strategic decision to not join the board. You know, I was intentional about that because I didn't want my listings on MLS. And that was a big risk, you know, because the market, all of the owners were used to that type of deployment, you know, of their listings. That's how people found out about what was on the market. And I wanted to come in and do things a completely different way.
That's really,
Did that pay off?
It did. I mean, talk about grit, you know, I don't know that I used the word, you know, grit back then, but fortitude and resolve, you know, were daily things that I was speaking to myself about, that I really had to muster up a lot of resolve to stand up to the market the way I did. And, you know, there were, as you might imagine, you know, I'm the new guy that nobody knew. And I came in and was playing the role of disruptor. I was, you know, it's an understatement to say I was not welcomed with open arms. I mean, there were arrows flying at me from every direction. They changed. There used to be, this is a funny story. There used to be a commercial meeting at GACAR, Gainesville area. I forget the acronym, what it means.
Real estate.
Right.
Yeah.
Something. It's the local board. I've deleted that out of my memory, but they used to have a commercial meeting, and it was open to everybody, anybody that wanted to come talk about commercial real estate or listen. And they'd bring in speakers, and you know, there'd be bankers and lawyers and you know, sometimes brokers from out of town. There'd be owners. You know, it was a big group meeting, and so myself and as our team grew, you know, a couple of us would show up. They became so enraged at the market share we were gaining that they got a group of other commercial brokers got together, and they changed the rules to no longer allow us to be able to attend those meetings. And one of the guys who was a good guy that was on that board, he was resistant to that change. He voted no. And he's the one that they said, well, you got to go tell Nick about this. And he was very uncomfortable sharing this news with me. And when he did, and I felt like he was sincere, and I appreciate, you know, him coming to do what he did. That was a hard conversation. When he told me, a big smile came across my face, because that was just a moment for me of validation that, you know, we had gotten so far under their skin that they were changing the rules for their organization to not allow us to attend a meeting that, quite honestly, was a pretty low value endeavor anyway. So that was a big, you know, I could have taken that as, you know, geez, I gotta jump in line and I gotta conform, and, you know, they taught me a lesson and I better learn how to play ball. I kind of took the opposite stance. I took that as a validation that I'm onto something. If they're having to go through desperate measures like this, you know, we're making an impact, and we're onto something good here.
Were there other validations along the way? Because if you have that resolve, you know, it's also, you got to have those validation points along the way, or at some point, right? I mean, or does resolve run out? You know? Yeah.
Well, there were look, there were several along the way, and I used to call them proof of concept. I mean, I was, you know, every day kind of swimming in uncharted waters, and there's a book called Blue Ocean that you guys have probably heard of, and you know, that I was trying to start my business in the blue ocean, not the red ocean that everybody else was competing in. So as we started to pick up bigger and bigger clients, and institutional clients, you know, like real estate investment trusts, and you know, other big institutional groups that own public shopping centers, and usually that type of business historically in Gainesville was being done by brokers out of town, because those big owners don't want to hire a hybrid firm, generally speaking, you know, that is residential and commercial. They want to go with a big nationally known company, because you're dealing with an asset manager who, you know, usually is not a risk taker. They want to hire, you know, the the sure thing, in a company. So that's why a lot of that business gravitates to the big national firms like CBRE and JLL. We started to become that national company. Even though we were a small local company, we were seen as somewhat of a level playing field with those other big groups. So that was validating. Another big one was Trimark hired us to represent them with their commercial space in the innovation district. And that was a competitive situation. We went up against the longstanding firms, and this was very early on. And John Fleming, and I, we've been on boards together and have really gotten to know each other over the years. And, I've shared with him, that was when he called me that day. I can remember where I was driving on Newberry Road when he called me to tell me that we won the assignment and beat out our competitors. I've told him that was kind of my Heisman Trophy moment, that he's a longstanding owner, well-respected, very competent developer and owner, and put us through a pretty rigorous process, in evaluating our capabilities up against our competitors, and gave us that assignment. And that turned out to be just a huge feather in our cap, just being able to build a relationship with Trimark, being affiliated with that project at its infancy and really at the beginning, and then, performing for Trimark and, helping them lease up a lot of the buildings that they own in Innovation Square. So that was very gratifying.
What was that the biggest validation?
Yeah, at that stage, for sure.
The tipping point.
Yeah, I think it was, for sure. We later were hired by UF. We were hired by Santa Fe. We did work with the city of Gainesville. And so it's like slowly but surely, we started winning the assignments, from all the major owners. We took over Progress Park for the Real Estate Investment Trust that bought most of the assets up there. The Regency Centers, which is a big shopping center REIT that owned a couple public centers in town. They hired us to represent them, not just in this market, but also Ocala. And that's another thing too, just in terms of proof of concept. We took what we learned here in Gainesville and we followed some client relationships to other markets. And, that was a series of validations as well. That, okay, is what we created here, are we able to do business in other markets? And so, Ocala became a big success for us. And so did Tallahassee and Jacksonville as well.
Yeah. So some of these validation points might be multiple years apart, right? They're not like, it's not, none of this stuff's overnight. So the textbook psychology definition of grit is power and passion and perseverance for long-term goals. And, this day and age that we live in is so instant gratification, right? But what you're saying is you had 5 years of sitting on the sidelines, and then started to, the validation points were trickling in.
Yeah. Yeah, look, and you make a great point. It didn't all happen at once. Growth, we all want growth to look like this. It usually looks like that. You have these peaks and valleys along the way, and you hope that the trend line, continues to take you in the right direction. Look, for the first, probably, no kidding, like probably 4 years of jumping into this, I questioned myself every day. Am I doing the right thing? I had to overcome the desire to retreat and just run away from it. And some of that was, as the team started to grow, I found myself in a new set of uncharted waters of all of a sudden I have to manage people. And, I was literally building the airplane while I was flying it. I had no experience in really running a company and, dealing with bookkeepers and, and property managers and marketing people and support staff and all the other things that come along with, growing an organization. So I was making that up as I went along, and I didn't have a roadmap to follow or another firm, that I could point to here locally that I said, well, I want to model myself after that. So I just had to kind of trust my gut and roll with it. But literally almost every day I would say, man, maybe I should just fire everybody and, do my own thing and do fewer deals and one thing at a time. But I had to motor past all of that and, dig deep to find the resolve to get past that till I finally got to an inflection point where I felt like I'm building enterprise value. I'm not just hobbling along, and doing one deal at a time. I got to a point where I really felt like, all right, we've built an identifiable brand. We've built some infrastructure. We have some operational controls, right? I kind of regained, my sanity a little bit at some point.
What was fueling that resolve? Right. I mean, there's 4 years to kind of hit the tipping, and we're just using 4 years here, but around that 4 to 5 year mark, you hit the tipping point with Trimark. You're continuing to grow. That presents more issues to a certain point, right? Yeah. I mean, it's good issues, but still. But what kept filling that reserve to keep after it?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of things that helped fuel that. I mean, I'm a competitive person, and that was certainly part of it. I was energized by hearing people say that what we were trying to do, what I was trying to build, was not going to work. That gave me fuel to want to prove people wrong. Anytime we hit resistance, it really made me realize that we were onto something. So I took that resistance and a lot of that negativity and just used it as fuel. There's a great line I heard that everybody deals with fear, but you can either use fear can affect you as a headwind, or you can use fear to your benefit and use it as a tailwind to help propel you forward. So when I would hear those voices in my head, I would try to just use that as fuel to help push me forward instead of stopping me in my tracks. One of the other things that I realized is that, and again, this is something I probably didn't fully appreciate or understand at the time, but as I can now look back on that period of time in my career, the things that I said no to helped define our path forward more than the things that I said yes to. And that was another, kind of gritty resolve moment. There were some things that people wanted us to list that I knew if we did, we'd be right in the red ocean with everybody else. And so I had to have the resolve to say no to some things that were very tempting at the time, because when you're trying to build a business, I mean, you want to say yes to everything. I mean, that's your reflex. Can you do this for me? Yes. But, I don't know how, but we'll figure it out. And I had to really stay true, to our mission and this vision that I had for the kind of company that I wanted to create, the type of clients that we wanted to have. And so I said no, to a number of, very established local owners that I felt like would take us down, this path where all of a sudden, if we weren't careful, we would just look like everybody else. And I really wanted to create something different.
Can you dive into one of those for us? I mean, that's a great point, because yes, I absolutely agree that you're a new business, you're starting out, you're just trying to get your name out there. You've got your own kind of energy going with it. But yeah, I mean, the courage to say no when those deals are looking at you and when you need it and you're thirsty and you're hungry and you're looking at your kids going, man, I gotta make sure I feed them. I mean, there's so much going on in your head. I mean, yeah, I mean, if you can kind of case study one of those, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, there was one in particular, and it was a bank that had taken a property back. And, you guys have been in Gainesville a long time. There's a lot of commercial real estate in Gainesville that's not really commercial real estate. And 13th Street is popping up in my mind. So 13th Street, north of the university, a few blocks, you've got, what I'm sure were neighborhoods at one point, but now it's commercial space on 13th Street. So you have like, a stretch where there's, maybe a doctor's office and a vet and music lessons, and it looks like they're in old houses. And so there was a property up on way north, on 441, like up around Turkey Creek, that a bank had taken back. And, it was a good connection that I had at a local community bank. They had foreclosed on a property and they wanted us to list it. And it was one of those properties, it'd been a house that had been converted to commercial real estate. It was in disrepair. And I said no to it. And, after, it was a gracious no. I was very grateful that they
wasn't a hell no.
No, it was a very polite, well thought out and articulated no, after an expression of massive amounts of appreciation. But I just knew if we started listing properties like that, we'd look like everybody else in town. And I wanted our signs in front of the public centers and Innovation Square and Progress Park and Tioga Town Center and Celebration Point and projects like that, we did business with all of those, and not the commercial real estate that used to be an old house, but it was hard to say no to that at the time. And I didn't know what the reaction would be. And they understood. And, we went on to do other business together, which was good. So it wasn't I was very careful to not burn a bridge and maintain that relationship. So they understood, but it was, there were decisions like that along the way that, man, it's tough. You want to say yes to everything, because that could be your next paycheck. And, we were trying to grow revenue and needed every deal we could get our hands on. So those were tough decisions at the time.
So it sounds like, you had defined your mission, your vision. I mean, you go back to, this is what I wanted the firm to be. I wanted it to be different. So, I mean, there was a brand there. Is that something that was deliberate when you started? Is it something that you just kind of knew through business? Or was it, again, kind of that back to the resolve or the passion that you had for what you wanted? That, I guess I'm trying to think if there was a structure to it, or was it kind of inherent to you? Because staying on, well, one, understanding yourself, understanding your business, and knowing what that kind of brand vision is so important. And if you don't know it, it's hard then to stay on it.
Yeah.
But you did something there.
Yeah. I'll give you a very non-traditional answer, but it's the truth. My decision to go down this road and build the brand that I did had less to do with business and more to do with my faith walk and wanting to find a way to create a company where I could have alignment between where my skills and talents were professionally and a way to give back in a way that I thought God was calling me to do. And I never saw a way to do that with real estate. I had other people in my life who were in careers that I felt like were more directly connected to their faith walk. And I never understood how I could ever have that in a commercial real estate brokerage career. But I was able to piece together a plan and a vision that quite honestly terrified me when I came up with it. But the center point of my business at Front Street was that we gave 10% of our revenue to local charities. And when I came to that moment of conviction that this was something that I was committing myself to do, two thoughts entered my head immediately. One is that this probably won't work and I'm going to run myself out of business because that's just too much top line to give away. I don't know.
It was 10% of revenue.
10% of revenue, right? Not profit.
Not profit.
Right off the top.
All right.
And the second thing I thought is, this is a me kind of business. No one's ever going to come hang their license with me because I would, only hire somebody if they agreed to that same thing, be 10% off the top of all their commissions. As time went on, and so at first it was just me. A good friend of mine used to joke with me. He's like, man, you're not even a mom and pop company. You're just pop, because it was just me. And I really, when I started, I thought it may always just be me. I didn't have any grand visions of, growing a team. What I found though, is that I was wrong on both fronts. We were able to be, very profitable, giving 10% off the top. And there were certain people that were drawn to that same type of, mission, passion based company where they were attracted to that. Other people looked at me cross-eyed, when I'd interview them, and it was just not a fit. They didn't understand what I was doing. But other people, it really resonated with them and they wanted to be a part of it. So it ended up being probably the most defining center point of our culture, more than any other single thing. And it was very gratifying. It grew, that part of what we did grew beyond what I ever imagined it would in terms of our ability to impact local organizations. When I sold the company, that was one of the hardest things, to let go of. And honestly, it not just for me, other people on our team, that transitioned over to Avison Young. And so we found other ways, to engage personally, and sometimes collectively, as a group, in other ways to connect with the community. But, that was a big one. And that felt like a risk. And look, that was another thing that people would tell me. Anybody I ever sat down with and said, hey, here's my idea, this is what I'm going to do. Every single person said, other than my wife, who was very encouraging, every other person I talked to about it said, you're crazy. It's never going to work. You're going to run yourself out of business. the margins are too thin in commercial real estate brokerage. You'll never make money. And I took that as another challenge as well, and we figured it out and made it work.
That's pretty awesome, man. That is really awesome.
It is. So I hear, so there's passion there. The passion is not really just for real estate, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the passion for your faith and for giving preceded real estate, and real estate really became a vehicle for that. So would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Look, I came to my faith relatively late in my life, and just felt this tremendous gratitude for all the blessings I've had in my life. And like I said, wanted to find a way to bridge. I knew I'd never be, a pastor. I knew, I'd never be a teacher. I felt like I was good at real estate, and I had some experience and skills with that. And I really struggled to find that bridge to connect the two until I came up with that idea to
You had to make the bridge
to
basically.
give back. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was very gratifying. I mean, it came with its own challenges. I mean, I was always very careful. I never wanted that to be the reason that people did business with us. And so I really, I was very guarded about how and when I presented that part of our business to new clients, because I didn't want them to just pick us as their broker for that reason. I wanted to win business and relationships because of the merits of how we do business. And I wanted that to be just an extra thing that made them feel good, hopefully, about doing business with us. And for the most part, that was the case, but it was, very, very gratifying. It was like a whole separate kind of entity within our company, took on somewhat of a life of its own, once our team grew, which was very gratifying to me because, it's one thing when you're a small company to try to sit there and dictate, mission, vision, values, and things like that, and try to manufacture a culture. At some point though, you get above 4 or 5 people, that culture becomes its own thing. You really don't have a leash on it. And my team really took ownership of that part of our business, and they embraced it and ended up running with it. I pulled myself out of a lot of the decision-making of what charities we were going to support. And I felt like it was important for my team, to make those decisions. And, that was a whole other growth opportunity, I think, for a lot of people that worked with me and their ability to grow and lead. And it's funny, at first, this is how bad of a manager I was. I felt like, well, I need to make all these decisions. I don't want to burden anybody else with this responsibility. I'm going to take care of it myself so they don't have to mess with it. And as soon as I woke up and realized, that was being short-sighted, and I backed away from it and let others take over, like, it just grew and thrived, and they were way more creative and intentional about it than I ever was.
No, that's absolutely amazing. And how that kind of, we're going to use bold as kind of like a theme through this, right? But that decision to take the 10% drove culture, which then complemented your strategy, which then made the business that much more successful.
Yeah. It really helped. It was like a whole life cycle, that it created. And, the other thing, look, it's hard for, I think, just the general public to get real excited about commercial real estate companies. People get excited about, and I'm a huge fan of Cilantro Taco, okay, in Tioga Town Center. We helped put them in there, which was great. And
do you get free tacos?
I wish I did. I need to talk to them about that. But they're a great family. They've got a great story. They're these wonderful people. People get passionate about businesses like that. Like, they love the food, they love the vibe. That people don't get passionate about commercial real estate companies. Like, it's a very uninteresting business to the general public. But what we found is that, myself and others on the team, we were so engaged and involved in the community that people got passionate about our business. And there was this whole word of mouth that I really never would have anticipated. But we had so many tentacles into the community and just people we were interacting with, and they became very interested in what we were doing, what we were working on. And, if you think about it, what we get to do, in representing our clients, a lot of it is community building stuff. We're working on cool projects that end up being places that people like to go, or we work on projects where people go to work, which is a big part of our days and our lives, or where they, may live in terms of multifamily complexes and things like that. So, we having our fingerprints on these projects and places and all these community ties, people got more passionate than I would have imagined about talking about us and what we did and the impact we were having on the community. And that really helped. What I tell people is, look, this decision that I was so scared to make, I got to the point where I felt guilty about it, because we were benefiting more than I ever thought we would from this decision to give to charity. And it made me feel guilty and uncomfortable at times, because I didn't do it for the attention. I didn't do it to shine a light on ourselves. I did it, because of this deep desire to connect and give back. But, it's like you hear over and over again, like, you get back, you invest in something and you just, you get back a lot more than you give a lot of times. And I felt that was the case.
Yeah, that's awesome. So 2 things about Cilantro Taco whenever you pitch your free taco deal. Number 1, I've been on them for a couple months now, because we eat there, I don't know, probably 3 times a week. And I'm really we order the same thing every time. So I really want the Stefanelli to be a family meal that I can just order on repeat, because it would save me like 10 minutes a week reciting our order. I'll
bring that up in my next meeting with them. And maybe we'll call it the Carson, because your last name is just too hard to spell.
Yeah, I'm good with that. We can call it anything they want. They can call it El Capitan. I don't care. It can be Spanish. It needs to be faster than reciting, our burritos and our 2 kids meals and all the customizations.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. And then the second thing was, I'm hoping to have them on the podcast at some point. I see the guy, the younger guy, I don't know his name, but I see him at the gym a lot.
Yep, that's Nate.
Nate, yeah, Nate.
Yeah, so great guy. They've got a great story. He'd be a great guest as well as his mom and dad too.
Right. Awesome.
Well, we're kind of getting close to our time here. Carson, were there any other topics or specifics you wanted to hit on before we kind of do our wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, the only other question I think I had, you spent all these years, right? You built this amazing business with the word of mouth and the notoriety, and the reputation like you had, and then you sold it. That's kind of a lot of people's startup dream, right? Is build something worth buying and then sell it to somebody that wants it or can't live without it. So it's an awesome success story. Certainly didn't happen overnight, but what's next for you at this point? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, it's funny. The whole, I never ever thought about selling my company until we started getting knocks on the door, from some bigger companies. And it was very surprising to me, because I just felt like we're this little company in a little market, that is, is definitely a smaller market than the markets that get a lot of the focus in Florida, right? Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville. So it was surprising to me, but it all of that attention kind of came all at once. And what I realized is that every business transitions, every business has an exit. Sometimes that's the owner dies, before they sell the company or have a succession plan in place. Sometimes, the children or other family members will take over. And my kids, none of them really have an interest in commercial real estate, which is fine. I've never pushed for that. I want them to find, their own way in life. So I didn't want to die and, have the company just kind of fall apart. I don't have kids that wanted to be in it. I didn't really have what I thought was a viable solution in terms of an internal sale. A lot of my senior people were my age or older. And so that there wasn't really an internal succession plan. So I quickly realized that selling to a larger competitor or a larger company was really my most viable exit strategy. And even though that wasn't something that I was looking for, when those opportunities existed, I've been in commercial real estate long enough to know that those opportunities don't always exist. And I was 50 at the time, so I'm 53 now. And I said, this is way too young for me to retire. I've got way too much gas left in the tank. I'd drive myself and my wife crazy if I didn't have enough to do. I said, but the way these opportunities work, it comes with a contract, for a certain period of time. So in my case, it was 5 years. I thought, although this may be premature, I felt like we had a lot of runway to continue to grow as Front Street. It occurred to me that when I decided it was the perfect time to sell, we may be in a market environment where there were no buyers. And so I felt like Avison Young, and look, there were a few different companies, thankfully, that we had the opportunity to investigate and see if they were a fit. Avison Young, very quickly, it became clear to me that our cultures were more aligned than with any of the other companies. And I liked that they were privately held and growing and entrepreneurial. And, they took kind of a hands-off approach in terms of, my ability to continue to lead my team and make decisions here locally. So after I said no to them, about 4 times, we finally figured it out and came up with a mutually agreeable deal. And kind of like my decision to move to Gainesville, I've never looked back. It's been a good move. It's created a lot of opportunity for some people on our team. For other people on our team, it wasn't a fit. That's unfortunate, but I think understandable. It's hard to go from a very small company into a very big company, depending on what your job is. For our brokers, not a ton of change. For some of our backshop people, it was a lot of change. That's unfortunate and was unanticipated, but it's just one of those things that happens, I think. But yeah, it's in terms of what's next, right now it's just continuing to grow the Avison Young brand. I think at some point we're probably going to be a company that goes public. So that'll be an exciting change, at some point in the future. And, we'll just see after that. Who knows?
Cool. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Matt, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I got it. Looks like, your success, to this point, my guess is it'll be successful after whatever it is.
I hope so. And I appreciate you saying that. We'll see. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had in my life. And I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of amazing people, and our business. And I think every business, relationships are just central, to the core of what we do. And it's very gratifying for me. I mean, we've probably had 100 interns over the years, and I get to interact with them and still keep in touch with them and see where they're at in their careers all over the country. And, people that I've worked with for a long time, people that have left and pursued other things that I still keep in touch with and have relationships with. So I have a lot of gratitude for all of it, and, look forward to just expanding on some of those relationships and, continuing to forge ahead.
Awesome. Well, I mean, to look at you now, you kind of, this model of success, relationships, known and respected throughout the community. But, if we go back to the beginning, and who would think, looking at you now, the amount of fear you had every day for a number of years, and even that question of, will this even work in the beginning, and how that drove you, right? Again, I love the quote there, instead of it being a headwind, make it a tailwind, you use it to your advantage. Fantastic. And then that validation with Trimark, as far as a business validation, that, hey, we are professionals, we are going to make it, we can run with anyone in town, and kind of having that boost to then really marrying your passion and faith-based passion to giving back to the community with your business. And it drove your culture to then drive the business. I mean, that's awesome, to just kind of put a little recap on this and how it continues to drive you now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really been an amazing journey. It really has. And it's, you don't always, it's like a lot of things, you don't always appreciate it, while you're going through it, because you're so busy just trying to keep up and do everything you need to do as a business owner and trying to grow a business and everything. But, now that I've had a chance to kind of, take a deep breath and look backwards, because I was so busy looking forwards, all the time. It's very gratifying, and I feel very blessed for the journey that I've been able to be on.
Awesome. Yeah. More gratitude. Gratitude is the attitude. So in closing, I think, if you haven't already, can you just take a second and give us a quick snapshot? What would you describe as your grittiest moment?
Man, grittiest moment. I think probably the decision to do it, and I think that there's a lot of things like that we encounter where the hardest step is that mustering up the resolve to make the decision to move in a particular direction, and I think I was on a walk in my neighborhood, by myself, thinking about all these things when I finally had that moment of I'm gonna do it. And it took a lot of things to think about and overcome to get to that point of resolve and grit to say, I'm going to do it. And once I committed myself to do it, I knew I wasn't going to look back or retreat from it, and it took me a long time to get there, to commit myself to moving in that direction, because I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew I was jumping out over the cliff, and once I jumped, there was no looking back. So that was probably it.
Yeah, and it obviously stuck as a defining moment, and like you said, jump off the cliff.
What's the hardest step?
The first one.
There you go, baby.
Yeah. Well, it's like we just had some painting done in the house, and it's all the prep work, right? That is the hardest thing, and starting that and knowing the process, and I'm making it sound like I painted it. I didn't, but I was watching the painters and do the prep work. But they spent as much time doing prep work as they did actually putting paint on the walls. And I think it's a good example of all that time and thought and energy you have to go through before you even really start. I mean, that's a lot of times that's the hard part.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
But yeah, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I had the experience, and, glad it was a meaningful opportunity for a lot of people, not just me. And, I would do it all over again the same way, I think, if I had the chance.
Well, Nick, we certainly appreciate your time, you being open and honest with us, and hearing your story. It's motivating, for us, and I know it'll be motivating for others, and taking that first step and having that grit to get out there and do it and get after it. So congratulations to you, and thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me. I enjoyed it, and thanks very much for inviting me to talk with you guys today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, fellas.
Thank you for listening to the Grit Growth Podcast with host Carson Stefanelli and Matt Webster. We sincerely hope you were inspired by the interview and found at least one useful tool or tactic to implement in your own life. Now, level up by taking immediate action. Apply one lesson learned to your life as soon as possible to make sure it sticks. Post it and tag us to increase accountability. You can join the Grit Growth movement to restore American grit to its former glory by building an unprecedented force of conquerors, both in business and in life, at www.gritgrowth.org and wherever you're active on the socials. Please also drop a rating and review on your podcast app, as it goes a long way in helping the movement gain traction. Now, don't let this inspiration go to waste. Commit to conquer. Lead your life. Leave a legacy. Gather your grit and go get after it.